Well, g'day folks, and welcome to the final installment of our video series on the Madigan ride for this year. This is part 6 of the series. A quick summary of the trip. 3 bikes that left Melbourne. 2 of them finished the ride because one of them went off to watch Fink. 6,500 kilometres over 13 days. It was a mix of pub accommodation and motels and camping. So we carried all of our own camping gear, carried food and water and extra fuel where we had to, all the spares, anything that we needed, we carried it. As far as bike setup goes, there's a couple of changes to last year. I did a kind of a similar trip last year, a bit of a desert ride, and there was a few changes. I went from the Mosko 40s to the Mosko 80s, which you can see hanging on the wall there behind me. I also put a rack on the bike. I put a Globetrottin rack on the bike. I had a little bit of suspension work done as well on the bike, so I had a heavier spring put in the back and some valve work done in the front. That's kind of the main changes that were done between last year and this year. So let's talk about some of those things. I've got to say, overall, the Mosko 80s suit my style of camping and riding and gear packing just so much better. And paired with the rack, the whole thing is solid as, like it doesn't move, and just the larger pocket sizes make fitting gear in there just a lot easier for me. Now maybe it's because my gear is too big. I did make one change, so it's the sleeping bag, for example. Last year I did complain about the sleeping bag being too big. I got a smaller sleeping bag this year and the whole thing just packed beautifully into the Mosko 80s. The rack itself was great. There's no problems with the rack. It means you can tie the whole lot into the rack and it supports it all better and it doesn't flap around, nothing moves. Just a really good system now. As far as the suspension goes, I went up 1 spring rate on the back just to cover the extra gear and that. If I thought it was good before, well, it's absolutely perfect now. The heavier spring paired with the changes to the valving in the front meant the whole thing was just perfect, absolutely perfect. I'll play a little clip here and you can hear me and Pete talking about the suspension and just how good it is. You come off the DR onto this, the suspension is just like light years ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you think it's so good,
Yeah.
but it can still be better.
Yeah, then that's what I thought initially. I was like, oh well, you can't get much better than this.
Yeah, exactly. I was the same. Forks are good.
Oh, like 10 times better.
Yeah,
Just really.
just works well. Hey,
Yeah, it works really well.
it sticks. It just doesn't pogo all over the place.
Fantastic.
Yeah, whatever that valving is that you did,
Yeah.
it's awesome. So the takeaway from that is, spend the money on the suspension and get it set for you, your gear, your weight and your riding style. It makes a huge difference. It's really, really important to get suspension right on these bikes, on any bike. Of course, we had the tank panniers again as well with these. So they're the bags that hang over the tanks and you can put 12-litre bladders inside those. We had those. That was necessary for the ride that we did. And all of that extra weight meant this was a pretty loaded unit. I've got to say, I never actually weighed any of the luggage. I went through all that last year. It was pretty similar, I suppose, with some changes to luggage and that, but I never weighed it, so I don't know how much it was. Don't really care. I took everything that I needed and it was perfect. A couple of quick things. Sprockets, I ran a 1448. That was absolutely perfect. I think it was a JT sprockets on the front and whatever came with the KKE wheels on the back, but like no issues with sprockets. They lasted the entire trip. Obviously the back's going to last, but even the front, that lasted, and I was quite surprised at how well the front lasted even after 6,500 kilometres. The KKE wheels themselves, so this has got the cush hub in the rear. No problems at all with these wheels. I've been over them, I've checked them. Spokes are all tight, spoke nipples aren't rusting or anything like that. There's no dings, there's no buckles. And I did hit some pretty big sort of rocks and things out there. No issues whatsoever. The chain is an EK, I think it's an EK chain, X-ring chain. I've had a couple of those now. It was brand new, obviously, before we left. I set the right tension and that chain did not move, did not require any adjustment over the entire trip. 6,500 kilometers. And that chain was exactly at the same adjustment level as the start. And I found that on the previous chain, the previous EK chain that I've had on this bike, did not move. Shout out to EK Chains, they are brilliant. The tyres, on the front is my pretty standard go-to tyre for long distance adventure riding. That is the Pirelli Scorpion Rally. It's a knobby tyre, it is fantastic. It really lasted the distance. I'll show some before and after shots here of the tyre. You can see just how much that wore over 6,500 kilometres. On the rear, I tried a new tyre this year, Motoz Rals, whatever it is. I tried that, and again, before and after shots here, you can see it lasted fantastically. The grip, absolutely brilliant. So this covered everything from bitumen roads, rocky hills, sand, obviously lots of sand, and loads of gravel roads, and a bit of mud thrown in as well. And in all of those scenarios, this tyre held up fantastically. I reckon that'll be my new go-to tyre, rear tyre, for any sort of long distance adventure riding. So as for size, I ran the 140/80/18 rear. My brother actually ran the 120/90/18. I think it's a 120/90, so his was slightly skinnier, but same tyre, the Rals Z tyre, and both of us, no problems whatsoever with those tyres. I reckon they are great. For tyre pressures at the start of the trip, where it's just kind of gravel road stuff, I was running 21 in the front, 26 in the rear. Once we hit the sand initially, I put it down to about 15 to 16. I'm pretty sure on the second day in the sand, after it was pretty tough going, I dropped it down to about 12 in each end as well. I took a spare air filter, I changed that at, I don't know, about the halfway mark. Bit gungy on the outside, I think I've got a photo here, but the inside was fine. There was no issues on the inside whatsoever, so I changed that once. Let's talk about oil changes. Carried oil for 2 changes on this trip. First change we did after 26 hours and just under 2,100 kilometers. The second change, 29 hours and just under 2,000 kilometers. The third change, obviously, when I got home, so that was 28 hours and 2,400 kilometers. So they're the changes, about 2,000 kilometers thereabouts. That's how we did it. How did we carry the oil? Well, I just carried 3-litre bottles. Pete carried 2, and we put in 1250 ml in each change. So that third bottle, that was enough for four changes, if you will. As far as communication between us, now you would have heard a lot of the chatter in the videos, which I record through my helmet with a separate microphone. All of that was via the Sony 50R intercom, and we just used the mesh intercom. All 3 of us had the same intercom system, and that mesh system just makes it so easy to connect up. It is unbelievably easy. It's just great. You just turn it on, it just works. There's no pairing, none of that mucking around with, trying to pair up intercoms. It all just works. So that is my absolute pro tip. If you ride with a group and the same guys all the time, please get the same intercom. It doesn't really matter what brand, whether it's Cardo or Senna or even FOD Sports at the moment, they've got their own mesh system. All just get the same brand, preferably mesh, and your life will be so much easier. It is really a really simple way to get communications between everybody. Last year, you may recall, I made a point of saying we didn't use the helmet intercom, we used UHF radios between us. That's because we had a lot bigger group and we were a lot more spread out, like over kilometers, so it made sense to use UHF. This year, when there's only 3 of us, and for half the trip there's only 2 of us, we're always close, so we just use the helmet intercom. Now, I did have the UHF radio, which I could listen to other 4-wheel drives, say in the desert or on the roads, that came through the intercom, but I never really used it. It was really just the helmet communications. So for GPS and mapping, I used 2 GPS units this year. I used my Garmin Rhino as the small one, and I tend to have that zoomed in. And then I had the Montana 650 or 680 or something, my old one. That's a bigger screen, but it's sort of zoomed out a little bit. So that was my 2 GPS setup. Works fantastically. I really like having one zoomed out to get a bigger picture and one zoomed in, where you can just sort of see corners and things coming up in a lot more detail. It was also good because a couple of times early on in the trip, the big unit would freeze, and it was, I mean, it's pretty old. I'm not really expecting too much more out of it, but it still kind of works, but it was freezing up. So just to have redundant units was great. The other thing we had is the Garmin inReach. I wear a Garmin inReach on my backpack. It sits here on my shoulder. Pete has a spot tracker. So that's how we sort of manage the longer range stuff, and that's how people could track us back at home. We also carry 2 sat phones. We did a bit of a test. Can't remember the exact brand of the phone that Pete uses, but it uses the Thuraya system. Mine uses the Iridium system. We tested this in the middle of the desert. Mine connected up straight away, clear as a bell, no problems. He had a few problems with his. Don't know why, but he ended up just giving up on it. So his is a lot cheaper per month to use, but it didn't kind of really work either. Maybe that was a one-off thing, don't really know, but he wasn't that sold on his system. The Iridium system, though, has proven to be pretty solid, and it's a good thing to have, especially if you go remote. Have a sat phone, or have the inReach Mini with its messaging capability, so you can at least send and receive messages to the people back home. Let's now talk about fuel economy. It's always a big issue on an adventure ride or a long ride where you've got to manage your fuel. So it's kind of important to know what's going on with your bike and how it's going with fuel economy, what sort of mileage you can get. I'm going to put a chart over here. This shows the fuel economy of every fill up on the way. Now it starts at the bottom and it runs through to the top. And the column I want to focus on is the kilometers per litre. If I can work it out, I'll put some miles per gallon numbers off to the side as well. But for now, kilometers per litre. The first couple of fills were, you know, in the 20s, and 19, that was sort of pushing 20, but that's all okay. And then it starts to get a bit less. So 18, there's a 20 there, but 19, 18, 17. So it's all fairly low. And those numbers, they were lower by 1 to 2 kilometers per litre less than the other 2 bikes. So I was always getting worse fuel economy. That led to a few issues with running out of fuel, which I'm sure you've seen. But it also meant I wasn't getting what I was kind of counting on getting, which was important for the longer legs of the trip where we had to carry fuel. Now, given that I did have the Vortex ECU with me, and Richard is the owner of the company and he knows how they work, he was sort of thinking about this and he thought, let's adjust the fuel trim on this. Now with the Vortex you can change the low, medium and high sort of rev range, and you can change the amount of fuel that's delivered in each of those 3 ranges separately. So we changed the settings, we backed off the amount of fuel that was going in 2 of those ranges. And then as you can see on the chart, all the numbers are kind of in the 20s. There's a couple that dip down into the 19s there, and kind of ignore that 16 for a second. But all those ones in the 20s there, that's how it sat for the rest of the trip. And it was either better or the same as what the other 2 bikes were getting. So it made a difference. For the one that actually mattered the most, and that was the longest leg, that was from where we filled up at Mount Dare and we rode all through the desert out the other side to Jervis Station, 762 kilometres. I used 38 litres with an average of 20 kilometres per litre. And that's a lot of different terrain in there. So that's, you know, there's mud sections, there was 100km/h gravel road sections, there was a lot of sand, there was a couple of days of sand, there was, you know, corrugations, all sorts of stuff in there. But as an average, 20 kilometres per litre. And I reckon that is fantastic for this bike. I was expecting probably 45 litres or so to be used for that. I used 38 litres. Pete used 41 litres, so a few litres more than me. Can't complain about that at all. Now, if we hadn't made those changes, maybe it would have been different. Fuel economy on this bike, great. What's not so great though is this tank for fuels. This is an IMS, I think it's a 4.5 gallon tank, 17 litre tank. What I found time and time again was the last 2 litres in this tank is basically useless. It gets trapped in the right hand side, and the fuel pump can't obviously suck that out from the right hand side because the fuel pump's in the left. The simple solution is you lean the bike over and tip that fuel back over to get the last bit out of it. Not ideal, but that's, you know, that's a way to get some of the fuel back into the usable side. But it really annoys me. It's a 17 litre tank, and it's basically a 15 litre tank. You just can't get those extra 2 litres, or you can probably get 1 litre out of it if you tip it over a few times when it keeps running out, but it's not the right way to do it. Basically means you can't count on it for your calculations. So then that kind of leads to talk about the elephant in the room, which was the fuel pump failures that we had. 2 fuel pump failures on the one trip. Pete's failed first, just near Coober Pedy, and then mine failed on the last day. So his failed at 25,000 kilometers, 6 years, 350 plus hours. Mine failed after 21,000 kilometers, 4 years, 315 hours. Pete has carried a spare fuel pump for years on his bike, and that's kind of how we do it. So he carries the spare fuel pump, I carry a spare injector, we sort of split things up like that. After this trip though, I think each be carrying a spare fuel pump because you kind of just can't trust them. So not too bad, I guess, in the scheme of things. Not great though that it failed at all. In the videos along the way, there was quite a few comments that these fuel pumps don't like to run dry. It's the fuel that keeps it lubricated inside. You know, you run them dry and they're sucking up crap from the bottom of the tank. All of that can lead to premature fuel pump failure. Okay, I accept that that's a possible cause of the fuel pump failure. There was a few other comments about, you know, why did you let it run out of fuel? I never let it run out of fuel. It just ran out of fuel. Like, I'm counting on 17 litres. Okay, I shouldn't be counting on 17 litres. I should only count on 15 litres. It's also a black tank. I can't see what's in there. Even if it was a translucent tank, wouldn't have made much difference because I've got tank panniers. Still can't see what's in there. Fuel light on this bike does not work. So, you know, when it runs right down and the fuel light comes on, this one has never worked. Don't know why. Can't be bothered trying to fix it. I try to calculate my fuel usage based on the economy that I think that I'm going to get, but that was lower for various reasons. So I kept running out of fuel. So what's the solution? I'm not sure. Don't run out of fuel, carry a spare fuel pump. Clearly carry a spare fuel pump and know how to change it. Now I am trying to do a video on how to actually change a fuel pump as well, so keep an eye out for that in the future. Other problems with this bike, common to all three actually, the subframe. The lower subframe mount on 2 bikes, so Pete's bike lost 2 of the bolts, mine lost 1, and that was after that really super corrugated road and a pretty high speed run the next morning on a corrugated road, so that was that one. And Richard's bike, when he got to Fink, he had lost the top subframe bolts, so the one that's right up in the airbox, or you got to get to it through the airbox or something. And there's a few comments about, why don't you put Loctite on this? I do put Loctite on this bike. I put Loctite on all of those bolts and it still vibrated out. Outback roads, corrugations and speed over a long distance, if it wants to vibrate out, it's going to vibrate out. So a couple of the other issues on my bike, the screw that goes on the stand spring came loose a couple of times. I noticed it was loose and barely hanging on by a thread. I had to tighten that up a couple of times. I had a weeping fork seal, which I cleaned up using one of these little fork seal things, Seal Doctor or something, Rhino something or other. You can just pop that on there, spin it around and cleans the gunk out of that seal. That solved that issue. On Pete's bike, he had the chain issue early on because he didn't put an O-ring chain on. So it was a standard chain, and that was kind of his fault, I suppose, which we solved early on with a replacement chain. His battery died. That's a bit of a mystery. I've also had a lithium battery just up and die. I don't really know what to do about these lithium batteries. They're a funny size as well in this bike here. These lithium batteries, they're really small. Finding a replacement is going to be difficult. What do you do about it? I'm not sure. Like with an AGM battery or, you know, your normal sealed lead acid batteries, they're fairly predictable when they start to fail. You know, they don't hold the volts, or they get a bit sluggish to start, and you can sort of pick it up early on, is what I'm getting at. They're easier to sort of start to realize that there's a problem and you can do something about it. What I've found with these lithium batteries though is once they decide to die, they just die. I don't know what you can do about that. I mean, I've got a proper lithium trickle charger thing, which I keep on this bike. Maybe it keeps it in good condition. Not sure, but this is my second battery on this bike. The first one died. Pete, this is his has died twice now on his bike, so he's got a new one. don't really know, like maybe you should swap out the lithium battery and put in a normal AGM battery or a lead acid battery in these bikes if you're going to do these big trips. Not really sure. One other funny thing on Pete's bike was that starter motor. Toward the end of the trip, it was like the second last day or something, it started to whine. Like as soon when he'd hit the button, it'd start fine, but then you'd hear this whining sound as it sort of ran on a bit or something afterwards. Now that has since stopped, so he's been home and it's all been cleaned and everything, and it's gone away, but it did that for a couple of days, so I'm not sure if that is a precursor to some other problem with the starter motor. Not really sure, but it has stopped for now. Final thoughts on this bike. This was a big trip. 6,500 kilometers, 13 days on this bike, carrying all of our gear. You know from previous videos, I've had the seat done. I use foam grips, the wheels balance, I've got a steering damper, I've got a small screen for wind deflection, all that. I was super comfortable. I never had any issues at all, like vibrations, none of that was an issue for me. I was super comfortable on this bike. And we did some big Ks. I'll put a list here of the kilometers that we did each day. Some big numbers in there, and there's a fair bit of sitting down on some of those days as well. Not a problem with comfort as far as I'm concerned. Capable? Absolutely capable. You cannot question the capability of this bike. It can go anywhere, it can do anything, any terrain, any conditions, it'll get you there, no problems. And that leads me to this last point. Am I confident with this bike? I am 100% confident. We had some issues. We had a fuel pump issue, but you can cover that by carrying a spare or swap it out if you're concerned earlier on for a better brand. And yes, we had a few loose bolts. You can sort of do what you can to Loctite those on, carry some spares, check your bike daily. My point is, I'm no less confident with this bike than any other bike. Any bike can have any of those sort of problems, right? So it's just a matter of being prepared, I suppose, for things that may go wrong. If you know the fuel pump's a bit of a problem, carry a spare. That's what we do. I'm kind of also expecting a similar thing with the injector. Injectors are known to die on these. That's why I carry a spare. I'm expecting it. I'm prepared for it. Would I do this trip again on this bike? 100% yes. No hesitation whatsoever. I've got this bike set up now with its rack, its luggage, the suspension. It is perfect. Absolutely love this bike. Comfortable, capable, confident. So that's it for this series. That's the wrap up done. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have enjoyed making them. It's been a lot of work, I'm not going to lie. There's probably 20 to 30 hours for each episode that I did on that ride series. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. I like rewatching the rides that I've done over the years, and these videos are a great way to do that. If you want to go back and rewatch these videos, I will have links to the whole series down below. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the Ko-Fi link down below, or hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment down below what you thought about all this. That would be great. Thanks for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.